All right. Joining me is Cory Klippsten, founder and CEO of Swan Bitcoin, which is a Bitcoin focused platform that helps investors buy and sell Bitcoin. Though they can also help set up tax advantage retirement accounts to hold Bitcoin. They have a variety of Bitcoin custody options. They have a Bitcoin rewards credit card. I would say they really do it all in the Bitcoin space. And just today, they rolled out a brand new service that actually allows investors to convert spot Bitcoin ETF exposure, spot Bitcoin ETFs into real Bitcoin ownership. And we'll certainly get into all of the details of that. Cory, it is a pleasure to connect. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, and really nice to meet you. And appreciate the opportunity to get to know you and meet your audience.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation and a lot we're going to cover. I would say, including talking Bitcoin itself and what we've seen from its price over the past year or so. But let's start with Swan. As I just noted, Bitcoin is what you do. That's the sole focus of the platform. For people unfamiliar, just tell us a little bit more about what exactly Swan offers.
Look, I try not to be too reductive in these sorts of things, but I also do live in Los Angeles and deal with bankers a lot. And they tend to like to say something like the fidelity of Bitcoin, which is close enough to get started. But the point is, Bitcoin is an asset, and really an asset class that once you get into it and care about it, and it starts to be something that you learn about and start to own more of it, you realize there are a lot of different ways that you can own it and a lot of different ways that you can take advantage of owning real Bitcoin. So from choosing how to custody Bitcoin across the spectrum, from being purely self-sovereign, which is like you actually can just own your own private keys and write them down on a piece of paper or memorize them, go anywhere in the world and still be able to access your Bitcoin just by knowing your passphrase, all the way to, okay, look, I think I might lose that passphrase and I'm worried about the physical custody of this passphrase. And so maybe I want to do something like collaborative custody, where maybe I have a multi-signature setup and I have two keys, but I have a company like Swan that has a backup key for me. And that way I can just keep one on my desk and nobody can move the coins if they just have that one key. And maybe my second key would be in a safe deposit box, or, buried in the yard at my grandma's house or something like that.
And
And then you also could maybe just choose delegated custody, which is maybe custodying your Bitcoin with, an OCC chartered qualified custodian, something like a Bakkt or a BitGo, something like that. But then there's all the ways that you can own Bitcoin, like in entities and trusts, retirement accounts like IRAs, traditional and Roth. You can take out asset-backed loans against your Bitcoin. Now you can even use Bitcoin as collateral for a Fannie Mae backed mortgage, which is something that was done for the first time this week. So it really is becoming more accepted and institutionalized and productized into various ways. There's even a company doing fully Bitcoin denominated life insurance, for instance. So yeah, I just think you'll see it continue to spread through everything, just the way other asset classes like stocks, bonds, and gold and treasuries historically have.
who is a prototypical client of your firm? Like, give us a flavor for the types of investors you typically work with and maybe some of the issues or challenges you're helping them solve. You just laid out a few as you talk about custody and those sorts of things, but
Yeah.
who's a prototypical client of the firm?
Yeah. So our business is about 80% private clients. So it's about 14,000 private clients out of 100,000 total. So the business, 80% of the revenue tends to come from kind of the higher end and the long tail. Often we don't know, like that's maybe people experimenting and getting to know us, and then they graduate and become private clients. Um, and so, yes, obviously brokerage, so just buys and sells and limit orders, is about half the business. And then the rest is basically recurring revenue, savings plans, so recurring purchases, IRAs, asset-backed loans, and then the different custody products. Also, tax advantage gifting. And then, I think you and I are probably about to start launching into our newest product. Maybe this is a good place to tee it up. But yeah, today we're really excited. As of about 45 minutes ago, came out of an embargo. Swan RBX is launched, which is the real Bitcoin exchange. And this means that you can now exchange a Bitcoin ETF directly for real on-chain Bitcoin through Swan in a tax-advantaged way. So for most people, not financial advice, obviously check it for yourself and make sure you're cool with it. But, many of us on our team and many of our private clients over the past few months have been able to get out of, the one that most people want to get out of is Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, GBTC, that has the 1.5% annual fee, which is 6 to 10x over market. I think IBIT is at 0.25 and Morgan Stanley is at 0.15. So at 150 bips per year, it's pretty expensive. And it's really just kind of a cynical move on Grayscale's part to keep people trapped there because they have this large cap gains burden. If they sell the ETF back to Grayscale for cash, you have to pay cap gains tax. But because the ETFs that the SEC approved, so all of these ETFs that launched in January of 2024 are grantor trusts, legally the client actually owns the underlying asset. And that's what we spotted. And now we've built it and democratized it. This is something that some very rich folks have been doing with complicated lawyers, just for themselves and their own holdings for the last couple of years, but nobody made it available to everyone until now.
Was that Grayscale Bitcoin ETF the primary impetus for launching this? Because it's interesting, Cory. I've actually heard a lot more about investors wanting to go the other way, and maybe that's because I cover the ETF space. So I keep talking to ETF issuers where they're seeing large Bitcoin investors wanting to do in-kind creations and swap their Bitcoin for ETF shares. I think probably because they want to get onto the major brokerage platforms and actually not worry about custody and those sorts of things. But obviously, you see demand going the other way. And so just talk a little bit more about that demand. What are you seeing? Again, is it the Grayscale ETF or are there other factors here?
Yeah, it's not either or. There are people that have reasons to go the other direction. I think it typically has a lot less to do with custody, although that has come up here and there. A lot of it just has to do with portfolio loans and being able to trade on margin and just be able to use it as an asset in their normal brokerage. Or just, if you're doing family planning and, maybe you're an engineer that, doesn't know a lot about money, but scooped up a bunch of cheap coins for, a dollar a coin 14 years ago. Now you've got a family and some kids and maybe even some grandkids, and it's just easier to have it in your kind of trust and estate and planning kind of all under one house. So there's lots of reasons that people might do that. And I don't begrudge them for doing that. But there are a lot of people going the other direction too, where, I'd say since the launch of the ETFs, probably 2/3 of our new clients, maybe not initially. So if you actually look at the last 12 to 18 months, probably 2/3 of our new clients already have some price exposure to Bitcoin through an ETF. And they're getting more into Bitcoin and understanding the value of having something that's actually outside of the financial system, understanding what you can do with it, understanding how you can travel with it, kind of on, and just appreciating the fact that there's something that you actually can truly own yourself. That's not just a promise from a company that can be censored, that can be reversed, that can be confiscated. And so that's really the impetus for a lot of people wanting to get out of it. In this case, just like there is a purely financial reason, not philosophical or fear-based, to go from real Bitcoin into an ETF because of the cheaper rates on portfolio loans versus an asset-backed loan in Bitcoin world. There really is an economic impetus here to get out of GBTC and into real Bitcoin because you can carry your tax basis forward in every case that we've seen so far.
Well, and talk a little bit more about how exactly this process works. So let's say I do have shares of GBTC. I
Yeah.
come to Swan. Take me from there. How does this work?
Yeah. We'll open an account for you. You'll also onboard with an RAA partner of ours that's under Vista broker dealer. So you get an account there, and then the liquidity provider and the basically handles the exchange on the back end is Alpaca. So it's a 3-party transaction. It was initially more complicated and more manual. So we started doing this in December and January. It was a 53-step process at the time and took about a week and a half. It's down to probably 4 or 5 days now, and it's a 24-step process. But it is not easy, and it has to be done very carefully, and it has to be done to the letter of the law, and you need to do it right. I would not recommend YOLOing this, you will trip and you will fall and you will not do it right and you will have trouble with the IRS. So you definitely want to do it in the right way. We've done it. We've gotten all the legal work done and, set this up so that it can actually be done properly. So yeah, it's exciting. And I'm psyched to get it out there. You can check it out, swan.com/RBX to check it out, or just look up Swan RBX. It should be all over the internet and Twitter today.
Is there a minimum dollar value of ETF shares that an investor needs to hold in order to make this work?
There's not. Because there's a minimum transaction fee. I would suggest probably, it'll probably make sense for you to do if you have 100,000 or more dollars worth of GBTC. Below that, maybe you can kind of run the numbers. It probably makes sense down to like 60 or 65, really. But we've just been kind of guiding our clients, like if you have 100,000 or more, check this out.
And then again, we're talking GBTC here, but does it matter which spot Bitcoin ETF or ETFs an investor holds, or can you accommodate this swap for all of them? Obviously, it needs to make financial
Yeah,
sense on the investor side, but can you accommodate this for any
we
type of?
can. We haven't seen much demand for it because people don't have a bunch of capital gains in IBIT and FBTC because Bitcoin price hasn't gone up a ton since they launched. I think Bitcoin was in the 30s when they launched. It ran up to 73 really quick, and first or second quarter of 2024, and now we're still sitting at like 62, 63 today. So they're not sitting on these huge capital gains taxes that they want to carry forward the cost bases of into real Bitcoin. I do see on our roadmap we'll obviously do a lot more of that when Bitcoin, I think, inevitably goes up to 200K and higher. I think that will be attractive, getting people to transfer their other ETFs besides GBTC. But I think the real game right now is, basically the $10 billion that's very cynically trapped in GBTC that should be let free.
If we put that piece aside, just the money that's trapped in GBTC, and then even the tax considerations you mentioned, just given where the price of Bitcoin is at, it's funny because we were talking before we hit the record button. I've covered the ETF space now for 20 years, and I remember back in 2013 when the Winklevoss twins first filed for a spot Bitcoin ETF. And the more I thought about it as that process evolved, I was pounding the table and saying, you know what, Bitcoin ETFs are going to serve as a bridge between TradFi and DeFi. I've said from the very beginning that as investors buy Bitcoin ETFs and they learn more about Bitcoin itself, well, ultimately they're going to want to be in the Bitcoin ecosystem. They're going to want to own Bitcoin direct. So as time goes on here, now that these ETFs have been live and people have learned more about Bitcoin, do you think that could just be a primary source of demand, putting aside any considerations around fees or taxation?
What are you suggesting would be the primary or a primary source of
Just
demand?
simply that as people have purchased spot Bitcoin ETFs and learned more
Mhm.
about Bitcoin, because maybe coming in, they didn't know a lot about Bitcoin, but they wanted some exposure.
Yeah,
They got it through the ETF. They started
yeah,
learning about Bitcoin and they go, you know what? After the more I've
absolutely.
learned, now I do want to
Yeah,
own
for
Bitcoin
sure.
direct.
Look, the top of funnel for Bitcoin from 2009 till about 2017 was Bitcoin. People got into Bitcoin and learned about Bitcoin. And then basically there was a 7-year period, 2017 through 2023, where the top of the funnel for Bitcoin was crypto. And it was because there was $100 billion of altcoin VC money pumped into marketing better Bitcoins, all these ICOs and all these pump and dump scams and all these utility coins and all this garbage. There's 30 million of them out there, and every single one has fallen dramatically in Bitcoin terms since inception. Since their first pump, basically, they're all pumps and dumps. And so they have a pump, and then it just goes like this over time and just tails off against Bitcoin. And that will always happen. Like, you can't stop these things from launching, but they're all trash. Um, so yeah, I think the end of the altcoin wars was basically the launch of the ETFs in January of 2024, and I've posted about this and talked about this constantly since it was obvious that there were going to be Bitcoin ETFs since May of 2023 when BlackRock filed. They don't file unless they're going to get it. And so we just started preparing for it. That's why we ended up basically moving way up market and focusing more on affluent and high net worth and less on mass retail. we still have a mass retail product, but it's basically just buy and withdraw for free, and that's it. And it just lets you get to know Swan, and hopefully we find some private clients from among the people that are experimenting with it. But and we also moved more mid funnel, because the top of funnel, again, as I mentioned, I think about 2/3 of our new clients the last 18 months already have some Bitcoin price exposure through an ETF, but then they've been exposed to more Bitcoin education, and they start to value real Bitcoin more than price exposure in an ETF. I talk about the concept of a sovereignty multiple pretty often, where basically, like, how much more valuable is Bitcoin that you hold the keys for than another asset that's inside the system, whether it's a Bitcoin ETF or stocks or bonds or whatever. And, in the West, our sovereignty multiple should by definition be lower. And I think, for most people, it's like, yeah, it's like 10% more. For me, I kind of, when I actually look at my activity and, what I would sell Bitcoin for, or how much more I kind of hoard Bitcoin and want Bitcoin, my sovereignty multiple is at least 1.5, if not higher. So I value Bitcoin at least 50% more than any other asset that's inside the system. If you go elsewhere around the world and you look at like Turkey or Argentina or Lebanon or any place with capital controls, that could be 10x easily versus having, fiat inside a bank in Argentina, or even owning, anything really in Lebanon, where you can just kind of lose it very quickly. They can do bail-ins, they can confiscate everything. I mean, there's a lot of autocratic regimes where really nothing's safe. You're just kind of at the mercy of the party or the autocrat, right? And so having Bitcoin that's completely outside the system is insanely valuable. Could be asymptotically near infinity. It's like the only thing worth owning. You can't get across the border with a big brick of gold. They're just going to take it from you.
Going back to your point on altcoins, we've obviously hammered home the point that Swan focuses on Bitcoin. What do you do if clients come to you and they hold other crypto assets? Do you tell them to keep those elsewhere, go elsewhere? I'm just curious, how do you think about that? Because you do have a lot of people who maybe they are predominantly exposed to Bitcoin, but they own other crypto assets as well. How do you think about that at Swan?
It basically never comes up because, obviously we educate constantly in the media, and we have a massive owned media operation and PR. So we're kind of out in the media constantly. And, if you like altcoins are for trading, Bitcoin is for owning. It's just very different mentality. And we tend to work with principals, not agents. We tend to work with people that want to, it's a one-way trade. They're buying and holding for the long term, not trying to get in and out of a bunch of positions. So really, if you want to trade crypto or do prediction markets or gamble on penny stocks or gamble on sports or whatever, those tend to be kind of like the Coinbase clients, the Kraken clients, the Robinhood clients. It's usually kind of lower end retail, kind of trading in and out of a lot of positions, versus buying large chunks of Bitcoin and figuring out how to fit it into your family's wealth plans and financial future and generational wealth, et cetera. So it's just kind of a very different segment. I don't think anybody's come to us asking for us to do anything in altcoins in 4 or 5 years.
To your comment on Bitcoin is for owning, let's talk a little bit more about that. And you were alluding to this earlier, but you look, Bitcoin is now down about 50% since early October, and there are some different numbers floating out there, but I think it's generally believed that the average Bitcoin purchase price for spot ETF holders is somewhere around 80,000 if you average it all out. And of course, Bitcoin is currently trading around 62, 63,000. And so point being, this hasn't necessarily been the best experience for ETF holders so far. And so maybe talk a little bit about that. And then I'd love to hear more just about how you position the longer term case for owning Bitcoin overall.
Yeah. Well, first off, welcome to the class of 2024-25. It's good to have you. This is how it works. People get attracted by the shiny price rises, and they buy in somewhere in the middle of that, and they keep buying to the top. I came in spring of 2017, and I got some Bitcoin, at 3K, 4K, 5K, and I was still buying. I think my last purchase in the bull run was, I think it was on a Saturday morning. I woke up and smash bought from my phone, with the family in Palm Springs, and I bought it 19,200, and it peaked at 19,700 and then crashed. And over the course of the next year, It went down, I believe, 84, 85%. It bottomed out in December of 2018 at 3150, so 3,150. And then it went up to 69,400, and then it went down to 15,500, and then it went to 126,000 last October, and now it's down to 62. I think it bottomed out at 59 last week. So what's interesting to see is I would just kind of chart the higher lows. So the low in 2011 was $2, and then 2014 it was 180, and then in 2018 it was 3150, and then in 2022 it was 15,500. So it tends to do this. It tends to go like this. It's just kind of like a wave that has higher highs and higher lows, which is kind of expected. You this thing will be a large percentage of global store of value in the future, but it can't go there in a straight line. Of course, there will be waves where people get more interested in it. Animal spirits take over. People like the price is the marketing. The price rise more than anything else. I'd love to say it's all the sovereignty education and people being interested in the technology and everything, but the best marketing for Bitcoin by far is when it goes on these parabolic runs and rises a lot, and then a bunch of people pile in, and a lot of people come in hoping for a hot trade and hoping to clip something. But a lot of those people learn about Bitcoin through chasing the shiny object, and they stick, and then they become constant savers in Bitcoin. And that's where we get people, coming to Swan all the time to set up recurring purchase plans, and they just buy it daily. I've had a daily purchase going for over 5 years, just buying a little bit of Bitcoin every single day for my family. You're a family guy, KU grad, like I want to get some physical activity. I want to get outdoors. I want to hang with my family. I want to do something productive, and I want to buy some Bitcoin. Like if I do those 5 things, it's a great day. And I try to get those things done in the morning. Then you're basically good in the afternoon. So I'm really bad at getting the exercise done in the morning. So that's the one that usually waits for later in the day, because I'm on Pacific time and it's always busy in the morning. But I really do feel that way. I really feel like you're doing something for yourself and your future, just buying a little bit of Bitcoin every day. You're making yourself more robust. You're making yourself more anti-fragile. You're making yourself more sovereign. It is kind of that protecting your downside. I think so much of our psychology and so much of what's marketed to us really focuses on, the greed emotion. We only have two lizard brain emotions in our amygdala. It's just fear and greed. And I probably over-index on fear. I'm a protect your downside guy for the most part. And I think so much of it is just kind of chasing shiny objects, and everything's about, make money, passive income, MLM scheme on the apartment housing unit, like whatever else people are getting dragged into all the time, the Grant Cardone stuff and the Tony Robbins stuff, and like just always selling dreams. And I do think that people live better lives if they take the time to think about what actually causes anxiety for themselves and their families. And, the primary one is like, where do I put my money? And I think that's more than anything else, that's what Bitcoin solves for our clients and for me and for other Bitcoiners in the space. It's like, we know we're putting our money and we have conviction, and we can sleep well at night. And that is an accidental Swan acronym, but we started to adopt it when somebody mentioned it on Twitter once, that they sleep well at night because they're in Bitcoin. And I do. I do not sleep well in fiat. I sleep very well being, maximally allocated to Bitcoin. I sleep incredibly well. And that's really what it's all about, is, just kind of giving yourself space to live a life where you don't have to be your own family's hedge fund manager after hours with a 3-screen setup in the basement, trying to, stay ahead of inflation. That sucks.
So, what would you say then to your point, the class of 2025 or 2026, where they have seen Bitcoin chopped in half and maybe they don't have that level of confidence? What could be some catalysts that turn things around for Bitcoin and give those classes the confidence that you have?
Yeah. So first thing I would do is you want to buy the whole curve. Don't try to don't try to catch a falling knife. Like if you've started to get a little bit of conviction in Bitcoin and you think it will go up, which is a rational understanding of the thing, I would just set up a recurring purchase and just buy the whole curve. If you have nervousness about like what your entry point is and you're scared about it hitting 53K or God forbid seeing a four handle, I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. I think probably the bottom is pretty darn close to end here. And that's why you're seeing so much volume trade here. I think that's probably the best way to think about it, is just dollar cost averaging into a position and just buying the whole curve. It's definitely difficult for us humans not to buy shiny objects and sell when everybody else is freaking out. That's just what we generally do, which is why 96% of day traders lose and just get their faces ripped off, because we're animals and our brains and emotions aren't really equipped for this sort of thing. So make the decision once and just Bitcoin and chill if you're into it, and just set up that recurring purchase plan is probably my biggest thing. Or just, make that one smash buy one time and just let it sit for 10 years. Don't buy it if you think that you're going to need to sell it sometime soon. It's not a trade. This is something that should be a permanent part of your portfolio, and just think about it that way. And like with all things, buy what you know. So spend some time actually learning about it so that you don't just listen to your buddy or your neighbor about Bitcoin. Like this is something you should try to understand, because you really shouldn't own things that you don't understand at all. I don't try to buy a bunch of pharma stocks. I don't study them. I have no idea which one. Like it's, by the time it filters down to me, I'm only going to get the thing that needs to be pumped, right? That's probably at the tail end, right? Like this retail distribution, whether the SpaceX IPO actually works out for retail or not, it will be very lucky and atypical if it goes up a lot from the IPO price, because you can just see how it's being marketed and how it's basically a bunch of insiders exiting, selling a ton of their stock, and they're trying to push it onto retail, not the smart money. And that's a classic time to run away. That doesn't mean that the rule always holds, but it's not a good setup.
But with Bitcoin, I mean, are there any particular catalysts that you want to see here in the short to intermediate term? Again, clearly you have a lot of confidence in Bitcoin longer term. That comes
Yeah.
through crystal
I
clear.
mean,
But
look, the narratives are always written after the fact, as we all kind of know. Whenever you look at an asset class that well, that what you see in the journal and Bloomberg is, basically after the fact. The narrative doesn't lead the price leads the narrative. And it's really Wall Street. It's all the bankers sit around and read Barron's cover to cover on Sunday, and they come in Monday morning to decide like what's going to get their clients on the phone this week. And they basically test out punchlines like stand-up comics at the desk in the morning on Monday, and then everybody kind of like picks the best one, and that's Goldman's story for the week, right? And it's the same way with journalists. So the narratives are basically always bullshit, and it's just more buyers than sellers is what drives the market, which is a very diverse set of reasons for all kinds of different ways. But in the long run, Bitcoin is the best money that we've ever had. It's the best store of value technologically and just kind of logically that we have on the planet for us 8 billion humans, and more people wake up to this thing. And it's, the churn rate of people that get into Bitcoin is damn near zero. Like nobody that gets into Bitcoin and actually understands it exits. It doesn't happen. And so you'll just always have more and more people adopting Bitcoin over time, and it'll just continue to increase over the long haul. So it's affected by liquidity. It's affected by capital rotation into AI. It's affected by a lot of large institutional holders of ETFs that have paper hands because they don't really understand what they own and they just consider it a trade or a risk asset. It's affected by, if stocks bleed on Friday and people think that there's going to be blood in the streets on Monday and they'll be able to pick up some things cheap. Bitcoin is the only thing in their portfolio that they can sell over the weekend to free up cash to be ready for Monday morning. There's a million different stories I could tell you about why it goes up and down. Like I literally could play narrative roulette and just shovel bullshit on podcasts and media interviews all day. And sometimes I do play that game on CNBC and Bloomberg and, dish out the narratives. But the truth is 8 billion people on earth. This is the best money we've ever had. And more people wake up to that fact every day.
all right, so your message: dollar cost average in and hodl.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so they
All
did
right.
teach some things at KU. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, which
Y'all
we
didn't
should we
know,
should
but
let
in
listeners
the
know. Corey is
I'm
a
a Mizzou
Missouri.
grad.
Yeah, and I'm a KU guy, so we have a natural rivalry there. But I'm not holding that
Yes.
against him. Hey, real quick before I let you go, completely unrelated to Bitcoin, I have to ask you about this. I saw in your bio something about your expertise, shall we say, in the early 1990s Seattle music scene. And
Oh
as it
yeah,
turns out, I'm
absolutely.
actually a huge grunge fan. So
There
Nirvana,
you go.
Alice in Chains, etc. I just had to
Yeah.
ask you about this. Is this like a passion of yours, or were you actually there? You got to tell me more.
So I was there. My high school years were 91 to 95, and basically every band you just mentioned, plus some, put out albums in the fall of 1991. And so I think we all just kind of thought that was normal, that there would just be massive bands, from your neighborhood. And of course, they're interspersed with the community, right? And, they're just normal people. And then it just kind of exploded. So, like my brother was playing hoops a couple times a week with Mike McCready from Pearl Jam. And I think one of my English teacher's sister was married to one of the guys from Alice in Chains. There were guys that, I graduated with and that were a year ahead of me that became, pretty solid indie rockers. My brother was a front man for a band for 8 or 9 years that was kind of locally famous, but you could only tour the Northwest, do it was like Portland, Olympia, Seattle, Bellingham, Vancouver was kind of the Northwest tour on I-5 for guys that got famous when they were older and had kids already. Didn't want to go on tour, so they'd basically play 5 cities. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think the one that touched me the most when I was young was probably Alice in Chains. Just something about the emotion of his voice was a big deal. The only one that kind of carries forward and can still do shows and is still alive is Pearl Jam. So I'll see them whenever I can. I've seen them in Sao Paulo. I've seen them in New York. I've seen them a bunch of different places, and I'll take friends and family to go see Pearl Jam when I can. But yeah, it was like the last truly earnest period of American music. It's pretty much all been pop ever since.
I absolutely love that. I agree. Who else was there? You had like Soundgarden. There were some others in that
The big four
early.
was Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Alice in Chains were kind of the big four, but there were a bunch of other good ones too. But I was young, so I was pretty much following the most popular ones.
Well, I love this grunge music from the '90s and Bitcoin. This has been a fun conversation, Corey. It was a pleasure to connect. Congratulations on the rollout of the Swan Real
Thank you.
Bitcoin Exchange.
Yeah.
Uh,
Again, let me just show that again,
please.
swan.com/RBX. And then I'd also say, I think people think that I get tons of emails, but everybody writes me on Twitter, and my company runs on Slack. So like, if you actually want to get in touch on any of these topics, just Cory@swan.com. Happy to put that out there. You can just get in touch with me if you want to chat more. Nate, this was great. I really appreciate it. Great interview. Happy to do this again. Check in a quarter or so.
Hey, thank you very much. Greatly enjoy. That was Cory Klippsten, founder and CEO of Swan Bitcoin. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Crypto Prime. As always, you can stay up to date on all of my latest guests by visiting CryptoPrimePodcast.com. See you again next time.
Crypto Prime is hosted by Nate Geraci, president of OTR Media LLC. Nate is also president of investment advisory firm Nova Diaz Wealth Management. While OTR Media and Nova Diaz are related by common ownership, they are separate and distinct entities, and anything discussed on this program should not be construed as an official statement by Nova Diaz. Some guests appearing on this program may also be financial sponsors of Crypto Prime. This program is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investing in crypto assets involves substantial risk, including the possible loss of principal. Any past performance figures discussed are not necessarily indicative of future results. Visit CryptoPrimePodcast.com for more information.